you can almost recognize truth by its simplicity. That if something is almost like overly complicated around systems or around minutia, it's obscuring something, because I think the reason fairy tales are so powerful and certain children's stories are so powerful is because if it's wise and true, perennially true, it was true thousands of years ago, it'll be true thousands of years in the future. We get it. We get it intuitively. We don't have to do much. You don't have to do any calculations, to get it. It's just evident.
Welcome to The One You Feed.
We often imagine that once we have it all, the inner struggles will disappear. But as Josh Radnor reminds us today, even outward success, fame, acclaim, creative fulfillment isn't enough to quiet the deeper battles within. In this conversation, Josh shares how real freedom comes not from achieving perfection, but from making peace with the messy, unfinished parts of ourselves. From navigating identity and public image to sitting in deep discomfort, Josh offers a powerful reminder that a meaningful life isn't built on external measures, it's shaped from the inside out. I'm Eric Zimmer, and this is The One You Feed. Hi, Josh. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I am really excited to have you on and talk with you about your new podcast, Substack, your life as a musician, and obviously your life as an actor. But before we get to that, we'll start like we always do with a parable. And in the parable, there's a grandparent who's talking with their grandchild. And they say, in life, there are two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One is a good wolf, which represents things like kindness and bravery and love. And the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear. And the grandchild stops. They think about it for a second. They look up at their grandparent and they say, well, which one wins? And the grandparent says, the one you feed. So I'd like to start off by asking you what that parable means to you in your life and in the work that you do.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the greats. I mean, you built the entire show around it, and I understand why. I think it's about free will at some core level, but I also, I am very suspicious of people who kind of say they're all good, and I'm also suspicious of people who say someone is all bad. I think that we have worlds inside us. We have the whole world inside us, and so I just think it's an honoring of the fact that there is that dark wolf, but it's also an acknowledgement that where we put our attention is what we grow. So I sometimes think about it like I have like 51% of like the light wolf in me and 49%. Like there is a slight majority of like the wolf of kindness and virtue and all that. But there's this other part of me, and I think we're in a shadow denying society. That's why there's so much blame and shame and accusation and finger pointing and scapegoating. So I think it's a sign of great mental health to acknowledge the dark wolf inside you, to at least say it's there. And then you might be much less trigger happy at pointing the finger at other people.
Yeah. In one of your essays on Substack, you actually talk a little bit about this. You talk about internal family systems and Richard Schwartz. We've had Richard on the show to talk about internal family systems. And I think the thing when I hear the parable today, right, and I've been reading it for a decade now, is that like there's not two wolves inside me. There's a whole bunch of them.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's a lot going on in there when I pay close attention. And but I think ultimately you sort of put your finger on it when you said it's about where do I put my attention? And I think putting our loving attention on the parts of ourselves that might seem like the dark wolf is actually, that's the way you do it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think Richard Schwartz really cracked something there. Like when this kind of search for some sort of solitary identity feels like folly. Like you just have to kind of acknowledge that there's like a chorus of voices, wounded parts of ourselves, even ancestors or more, higher kind of voices that are wiser than maybe our current self. Like those are all in there too, and they're all accessible, I think, if we get quiet enough or skilled enough at kind of just asking to be contacted with them.
Yep. You've got a new podcast out, which is a rewatching of the show that I guess we would say made you famous, which is called How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah.
And in that show, there's the character who's, I don't know, in his 20s, late 20s, early 30s. And there's also the character as a 50-year-old, sort of the narrating.
Right.
And I think what you just said there sort of ties to this idea that we can access wiser parts of ourselves. And one of the ways to do that, actually, I think, and lots of different traditions have talked about this, is to imagine your 50-year-old self or your 70-year-old self or your 80-year-old self. So the show way back when was kind of on to an idea that I see recur in psychology and various indigenous traditions about trying to contact that part of you that's actually already wise.
Yeah, it's true, and it is something we're unpacking on How We Made Your Mother, the podcast Craig Thomas and I are doing. My wife is a clinical psychologist, and one of the things she will sometimes ask patients to do that she's told me that I think is so wonderful is if they're tied in knots about something and really confused about an issue, she'll say, without thinking, "What does your 85-year-old self say?" And the 85-year-old self is there. It's ready to communicate. Most of the time this is not a big deal, or let's not worry. Let's not worry about that. But I've asked Craig and Carter, the other co-creator, about this notion of an older, wiser narrator character looking back on his life. There's that great Kierkegaard quote that life can only be understood backward, but it has to be lived forward. So you have this narrator, wiser voice who's looking back, and he can be a little more lighthearted about things because he knows how things worked out. Whereas the character I was playing was much more just stumbling through one foot in front of the other. But I think that I asked them, they were, in their late 20s, early 30s when they were writing the show. I mean, it lasted for a decade, but like, why I said it was a kind of chutzpah, to say like, oh no, here we're going to write this older us voice, this older, wiser voice, but they were also the age of the protagonists. And they said it was almost like a hope. It was like a hope that there was some voice out there that could be guiding and benevolent. And I think ultimately it's a very sweet part of that show that there's this narrator that knew that he landed on his feet so he can tell all these embarrassing stories about himself. Yeah,
I think that, again, that idea is that wisdom is actually not that complicated, right? Like we can keep reading about it. And I've been making podcasts for a decade on the general ideas of what it means to live a good life. They're not that complicated. The problem is that A, we forget them constantly, and B, we don't know how to live them.
Right. I mean, I think that you can almost recognize truth by its simplicity. That if something is almost like overly complicated around systems or around minutia, it's obscuring something, because I think the reason fairy tales are so powerful and certain children's stories are so powerful is because if it's wise and true, perennially true, it was true thousands of years ago, it'll be true thousands of years in the future. We get it. We get it intuitively. We don't have to do much. You don't have to do any calculations, to get it. It's just evident. But I agree with you that we have the kind of built-in forgetter that for some reason, I always think of that movie Memento where he had to tattoo what happened he would have amnesia every day and he had to remind himself what happened. I feel like wisdom is like that. Like, you have to look at the word like change or like this too shall pass, like perennially wise sayings. Like sometimes when you're struggling and a friend says, it won't be like this forever. It's like the simplest, most true thing you could ever say, but sometimes it comes to you as if it's like Moses on the mountaintop. It's like it's divine revelation. Like, oh, I won't be feeling this way forever. That's unbelievable. It's like I know that intellectually, but sometimes it just when we're going through it, it's tough to remember.
Absolutely. I've talked about this on the show a bunch of times, and I'm bringing it up because you reference King Solomon in one of your Substack posts. But there's something known as Solomon's wisdom, and what it means is that King Solomon was really wise when it came to everybody else's life, but apparently his own life not so much. And so, it's called Solomon's paradox.
Right.
And it means that idea that I could be really wise about your life or my friend's life, but when it's myself, I have a hard time seeing it. It's just this paradox of being human.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes people like I'm not speaking about my wife here, by the way, but sometimes I think people in the helping professions they have a genius for seeing other people's stuff. It's much easier. I don't know if it's easier, but it's sometimes very difficult to apply your own guidance to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've sometimes like a friend has reached out for advice, and I like that one. I think that's one of the great things about friendship is you're all kind of trading off being each other's mentor and cheerleader and confidant.
Mm-hmm.
But when a friend comes to me and they'll ask me some advice, and I'll say something to them, and then I'll hear it back and I'll go, I should do that. Like that's really good. Sometimes we have to displace the advice to have it come back to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the idea of, well, actually, you and I did not bond over something that we should have bonded over first, which is that I live in Columbus, Ohio.
You live there
and
now?
You grew up there. I live there now. I'm in Denver today,
okay.
but I now live in Columbus, Ohio.
Wow, whereabouts?
Yes.
Where do you live?
I'm near Goodale and 315, sort of Grandview-ish.
Okay, yeah. My sister lived in Grandview for years. She's back in Bexley where I live, but
is that where you grew up?
That's where I grew up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh no, she lived in Granville.
Okay,
that's different. But Grandview,
yeah.
Yes, I know Grandview very well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, how cool! And is that around where you grew up?
It is. Yeah, I grew up in Worthington.
Oh, in Worthington. Okay, cool. Yeah, I did theater with a lot of people from Worthington.
Yeah.
So cool.
So when I saw that, I thought that was cool.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Back to what I wanted to talk about next, which is identity. One of the things that I think you've talked publicly about this, both on the podcast and on your Substack, is that you got to be known really well and beloved by a whole lot of people for a particular character.
Right.
Talk to me about that experience and how it has been for you and how it has evolved over time.
I mean, God, it's been 20 years of navigating that, right? So I think it's like, it would take me a long time to unpack each phase. I guess no one prepares you, certainly in drama school, for you're going to be playing one role for 9 years. Like that's not something they think you're going to do a role for 3 months or like, like do a Chekhov play for, 4 months. So I had to figure it out on my own. And sometimes I did that rather inelegantly. And other times I was able to have some more grace around it. But I just found it to be an incredibly strange, disorienting thing to have a bunch of, first of all, your anonymity getting eroded and strangers knowing who you are when you don't know who they are is a very strange, disorienting experience anyway. Fame is strange. Being visible is strange. People having ideas about you, projections about you. They read a quote of yours that was taken out of context and then, I don't know, they don't like you or you remind them of someone. Like you feel a little bit in your more vulnerable moments like you got a dartboard on your chest. You're just walking through the world and you feel like people are kind of sizing you up or having opinions about you. And some of them are often quite lovely, but that also feels suspect. Like you feel like these people don't really know me. They have this idea of me. And I think, I went through some crisis with it and I used various forms of kind of healing and I was just on the hunt for something that felt more authentic in the midst of all that. And it drove me much deeper on a spiritual path, weirdly. Maybe not weirdly, but like it's understandable. And then I got off the show and I was looking for, as an actor, I was only looking for roles that felt very far from the role that I had played. Anything that reminded me of the DNA of the part, I wouldn't do. But I also became a musician, and I've written and directed films. And so I was really just trying to diversify. But what I realized I was actually doing was running. I was running away from it. And I said in that Substack that you referenced that this character I played, Ted, was a part of me, like in the IFS sense. Like he is a part of me, in that he was literally a part that I played. But there's also, I can feel I revealed something of the world to the world of myself through that character. Excuse me. And I don't know, when I got married a little over a year ago, and my wife had never seen the show. And she said, look, I'm curious. And that was a good thing for us, for our relationship, that she had never seen the show. But she said, I'm curious about this time in your life that I missed. I want to see it. So I decided it was time to rewatch it, and we just decided to formalize it. Craig and I are doing this rewatch, and we're having a great time talking about it. But there's been something wonderful about having, much like the show itself, having this older, wiser perspective on it, rather than being the person inside of it, but actually looking back on it and seeing, oh, I wasn't half bad on that show. And the show itself is delightful. And I'm so much kinder to myself watching it now. So I'm having like a very meta, very interesting experience re-engaging with the show. But in terms of identity issues, it was both shattering and also opened up all these avenues of my life for which I'm incredibly grateful.
Yeah. I think that I love how you talk about it in such a nuanced way. And you referenced nuance in the beginning, right? We're not all bad. We're not all good. I think nuance is kind of the secret sauce to wisdom to a certain degree. But you talk about it in the sense, like, imagine that you were in high school. We were all in high school. And, 20 years later, all anybody ever wants to talk about is who you were in high school, not anything you had done since, all of that, and how that might get to be tiresome or confusing. And yet at the same time, you're also recognizing this profound gift that you got, right? I mean, that it changed the trajectory of your life in a positive way. And I like seeing you kind of come back and revisit it from a more holistic place. And I think the lesson for all of us is around identity.
Yeah.
And that identity is ideally, in my mind, identity is fluid, meaning I can play this part of me, I can play this part of me, I can see this, I can see that, but we tend to get fixed in this idea of who we are.
Yeah.
We just get locked into, I am this way.
Right.
And as somebody who studies change and has written a book that'll come out next year about change, what I know is that we are all capable of change, but if we believe we're not, we're really stuck.
Right. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Like, I had an acting teacher at NYU named Ron Van Loo, and one of the first things he said to us was, you need to expand your definition of yourself. You're here to expand your definition of yourself, that you're not this thing, you're all these things. And when you're more things, and when you know yourself to be more things, you can play more things. Truthfully, you can access more of yourself to play a wider array of characters. But in a larger sense, like my brother-in-law Gideon Jacobs, I saw him in this one-man show that he created last night, and it's this blind preacher character, and it was really fascinating. But he's obsessed with the Second Commandment in the Torah, which says, thou shalt not make any graven images, right? And his whole thing, going back to the Garden of Eden, again, not speaking literally, but allegorically, this notion that humanity in its primordial state was unselfconscious and connected to all that was. There was no separation. And then there's this bite of this apple, this kind of primordial wound, and suddenly it's, oh my God, I'm naked. Oh my God, you're separate from me. Oh my God, God is elsewhere, right? And there's this, it's actually like a horror story if you think about it from an existential point of view.
Totally.
Right? And his thing is that the commandment against images is actually quite profound. That what happened to Adam and Eve allegorically in the garden was that they suddenly got a self-image, which is grievous to our psyche because we're watching ourselves. And now, I mean, image is everything, and it's proliferated to the point where I even think about like the iPhone, I mean, one, he points out the Apple, right? Like we all have these devices in our pockets that are these apples with a bite out of them. And then the iPhone, the iMac, the iPad, there's this kind of I. And this recursive kind of loop of images, self-images. What does this say about me? What does this say about me? And I am as hooked by this stuff as anyone. I'm not hovering over this as some sort of like, angry prophet. I'm in the midst of this negotiation, and as I think we all are with image and identity. I think that everyone is dealing with it on some level. It's not just famous people. Everyone has some a persona or maybe a private self, and then there's like a public self. I don't like to create that much of a distinction between the two. Like I don't want to have a persona, even though it's hard. Obviously I'm going to be different with my wife than I am on a post on Instagram or something. But I also don't want to feel like I have this Jekyll and Hyde split in myself. But I think identity is really tricky, and when you become famous and you become famous for a particular role, it just pours fertilizer all over the many things that can be troubling about it.
What you just shared about your brother-in-law is fascinating. I had never heard that take on the Second Commandment, and it ties it. I'm a longtime Zen practitioner, right? And one of the things that we do in Zen is we're trying to see through this illusion that we are this separate thing, right? So I've always seen the Garden of Eden story as like I've been able to see the parallel there, right? That separateness, right? But I never thought about the Second Commandment in images that we create. That's really fascinating.
I had a friend recommended this book by a Sufi mystic that's all about music. And in the first paragraph, he says, music is the only form of art that's not idolatry because there's no form. It's from a transcendent kind of realm. You can't draw music, you can't capture it.
Yeah.
And I do think, I love painting and dance and theater. Obviously, I mean, I'm not an anti-image person, but I think sometimes when we have an image of ourselves and we are constantly critiquing it and looking at it from all different angles, one, it takes up a lot of time and energy.
Yes,
but it's psychically quite draining. And I know, when someone has a peak experience, one of the ways that one defines that is a loss of self, right?
Absolutely.
That you go away.
Yes.
And Jordana, my wife, has pointed out that like often after those peak experiences, we say, I could die now, right? Like there's you're resolved enough to the point where you feel like your life has achieved some sort of meaning that you wouldn't be haunted by regret, that you've seen through it in a Zen sense.
I love music, and I'm always interested in the music, creativity, spirituality connection, and the music is healing connection also.
Yeah.
So
I'll get you the name.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
There was a line that you used. I don't know if it's a line you've used before or if you just tossed it off, and it's during the How I Made Your Mother podcast. But you referred to how you view that show and your relationship with that character, and you use the phrase "the mercy of time," and I just loved that. Is that a? Did you just kind of toss that off?
I think so. I think maybe I've said that before. I don't know if it's like a catchphrase of mine, but But I do think that there is a merciful quality to time. I mean, often we look at time as a bully or a grim reaper kind of, after us. But at the same time is, if you've aged, say, and you have a different perspective on your life, if you have more forgiveness for your life or people in your life, if you find yourself less self-conscious, less obsessed with the opinion of other people. That's all time doing its work. If you've ever had grief, if you've ever had loss, relationships ending, just heartbreaks, innumerable kinds of heartbreaks, to feel not the same way you felt in the aftermath of that, in the shrapnel of that. That is the mercy of time. That time, it is a healer in some profound way. And so I don't know. I'm glad I was able to say that. I think it's really fun to say, yes, you can look at this as a goofy sitcom, but it also had some quite deep existential things it was chewing on at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm now intrigued to watch it, and I certainly never had seen it or had any interest in seeing it. But after hearing you guys talk about it,
doing our job. That's great.
I think this might be a good show. Yeah, I think time is so interesting. I'm here in Denver this week, spending time with my mother, who's 80, who I spent the last decade of my life with her in Columbus with me, but we moved her out here about a year ago to be near my sister, and she's in a senior community. So I have been there a lot this week, and you can't be around old people that much without starting to think about time, and the obvious downsides to it, that the decaying body and the challenges that come with that. And I do think time is a healer. And I also think it's necessary but not sufficient for certain types of healing, right? Like, I do think time will take the sting out of a lot of things, but I don't think time necessarily gives wisdom.
Right.
But I often look at myself and I think about, I was a homeless heroin addict at 25. I've been on a path of recovery since, and all this stuff I've done. And I look at myself and kind of where I'm at. And I sometimes think to myself, how much of how I feel now is all that work that I put in, and how much of it is just the fact that I'm, much older now.
Right.
and time has sort of done its thing to a certain degree.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I also don't think time confers wisdom. I mean, I think that you have to accept wisdom. It's almost like it's on offer. Yeah. It's almost like the library is there. There's free books of with all the great wisdom, all the greatest stories, all the greatest everything. You can go there. You can get a library card and you can read it. And I feel like wisdom is kind of like that. It's floating out there. And I think you have to volunteer for it. You have to kind of say, I would like to receive this. And then it almost like picks your antenna up in a different way. So you're more attuned. Yeah. You strike me, and we just met, but you strike me as someone like me who loves a good quote, who's always on the hunt for some new thing that will deepen, that you can kind of throw in the wisdom backpack and kind of carry along with you, right? Yeah. And that's always been really interesting to me. I think when you're younger and you're interested, or when you get the sense, okay, I understand that I'm not going to be young forever. Like, I'm going to age. And a lot of young people simply don't believe this. And it's, again, maybe that's the mercy of youth, is that you don't know that you're going to age. You think you'll be the at the center of culture forever. And it's like, no, you won't. There'll be another generation come along and your slang's not going to, work anymore. It's going to be like, okay, boomer. Everyone gets okay boomered, And but I think if you're looking and I was always interested, because I was always scared of aging, but I always was like, well, how do you do it well? Like, who are the people that I think are doing it well? I love this Franciscan priest, Richard Rohr, very much. Do you know Richard Rohr?
Sure. Yeah. I've had Richard on several times.
Oh, you have? I think I listened to
in Santa Fe.
Yeah. I listened to yours with Richard. I do remember that.
Or Albuquerque.
In Albuquerque.
He's in Albuquerque.
Yeah. So I've gotten to spend some time with Richard, and I got to sit with Ram Dass a few times, and there are just these characters that I just say this is, their bodies are betraying them. And Ram Dass is no longer with us, but he had a stroke that really immobilized him in certain ways, and Richard's had his health challenges. So the body stuff feels non-negotiable. I mean, you can try to keep the wheels on as long as you can, but there is a kind of sparkle in the eye of someone who knows something. They've gotten to an age and they know something, and they're not bitter about roads not taken and regrets. And they just seem to have called a truce with the world. I think Richard calls it like, I've heard it said like dropping the war with reality, right? Like I'm no longer at war with reality. And I want to be a person who ages with some grace, and I don't just mean looking good, although that would be terrific, but I really mean being the kind of person that a young person would look at and say they look like they know something, or they look like they're doing it right, or I'd like to get advice from that person. That person seems like they maybe know something.
Yep. When I meet old people and interact with old people, I think it's always instructive to me, because I see like, okay, that's where I want to go. And I see like, that's definitely where I don't want to go. Right. Yeah. And so like, in the way that my partner's mother, when she had Alzheimer's, that was a huge wake up call to us. Like, okay, health, like we can't prevent it, but there's a lot of stuff we can do that's going to make it less likely that we get Alzheimer's or other things. So I think about it in a health sense. I think about it in a sort of, as we start, old people sort of start to fossilize. So like pushing myself towards new experiences, which gets harder, I think, as you age. I just feel it already at 55. And then also, like you said, I think about it or emotionally or spiritually in that way. Like, okay, life is going to get hard from here in some ways. Like I know what's coming. So I need to be training now to the best of my ability so that I'm able to be one of those people that is able to do it with a certain degree of grace, because I can see how easy it would be to not do it gracefully. Yeah. I mean, I see, so.
Yeah, it's also like wisdom is on offer, but so is cynicism. That's also like an option. There's, again, these are wolves, right? They're all wolves.
Yeah.
And, but I always thought it would be such a tragedy to live one of these lives, which I consider a gift. I mean, I'd rather, as I say in one of my songs, I'd rather be here than not be here. I always thought it would be such a tragedy to get to the end of it and be filled with resentment and bitterness and grievance. And, like I want to get to a place where I am more forgiving, more compassionate, more generous. But I also don't want to undersell that life, is tough. It puts up a real fight, and it you can make a very strong and compelling argument that the world is meaningless and that bad people triumph and good people suffer, and like you could compile a lot of data around that. You could make as equally a compelling case about the opposite, right? Again, these are all wolves. Like, but I always thought it's so much more heartening, and it makes the universe for me so much more inhabitable to choose the latter. To say, I believe there's meaning. I believe there's a purpose to this thing. I believe that what undergirds this is something benevolent, That doesn't mean that death isn't real. It doesn't mean pain isn't real. It doesn't mean that, we're not going to struggle in myriad ways. But I just have to get my mind sharpened around, and it's a daily practice because I have the forgetter, I have that thing that forgets. But, conversations like this help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm a little bit more existentially turned in that I'm not a believer in any sort of ultimate meaning. But I don't think that makes life meaningless. I just think it means we need to discover our own meaning and imbue it into our life. But I agree with you 100% about that. Like, there are different ways to view the world. I mean, the old way of calling it was optimism and pessimism. And that's probably a little bit of, I think that's an oversimplification. Yeah. Those are binaries. But there is a view that orients towards the goodness that is in the world, the kindness that is in the world, the beauty that is in the world, the connectivity that is in the world. And if both are true, right?
Yeah.
Which I think they are, and we're making it up. We're making up the meaning we want to give it, because that is what I think we are largely doing. Then a good question is like, which is the most useful view? Right? Which view is going to be better for me and the people around me in this world? And for me, it's the view that is not cynical. It's not Pollyanna-ish either. And that's where I'd kind of like to take the conversation, because you have a great article on Substack that I really loved, because you got into perhaps my most pressing question that I think about these days. And it's this idea that, as you said earlier, dropping the war with reality makes a lot of sense, right? Because reality wins. And we also have a view of ourselves and the world and that could be better. Mm-hmm. And those things sometimes are at odds with each other. And I think a lot about, how do you know which of those levers to pull? I should change this lever. I should accept this lever. And I just love to hear you think through that question.
Right. Like there's, okay, so I have written quite a bit about this in terms of, we want to accept, there's a negotiation that has to take place between acceptance and action.
Yes,
right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the way I think through this is, if I throw a temper tantrum about something in my life or something happening in politics or the world, well, one thing I love, do you know Anne Lamott? Yeah, I think she has some great, just salty kind of wisdom. And I really like her quite a bit. But she says there's 3 types of problems in the world. There's me problems, you problems, and God problems. She calls God problems wars, hurricanes, natural disasters, things that are so outside of her ability to actually control and influence. And then you problems are obviously you problems, and me problems are me problems. And she says she gets into suffering when she tries to fix God problems and you problems, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me. That just clarifies things for me. It's a bit of a serenity prayer kind of breakdown. What can I control? What can I not control? But I think in terms of, I think that I try to avoid having temper tantrums around things as they are, because like you said, reality wins. But I think we have a much better chance of at least getting called on to participate if we start with acceptance. Like just a blanket acceptance, like this is how it is right now, right? And then we look at what we might be able to change and affect and what we can't. And sometimes you're going to, try to twist some knobs and it's not going to work. And other times something will, move the needle. But I think starting with the, like a kind of radical acceptance, it takes me out of some pain, right? Because the pain is in the resistance. It shouldn't be this way. And then you're really at war with reality, and you're really in a losing position. You're just this speck shouting in the Grand Canyon or something for something to be different.
I love what you said there, the negotiation between acceptance and action. That's really good, because that's what I think it is. I think often about, one of the first guests on the show is a gentleman named Andrew Solomon, and he wrote a book called The Noonday Demon.
I read The
about
Noonday
depression.
Demon. He's very brilliant.
Yeah.
Andrew Solomon, yeah.
He's brilliant. Yeah. Well, he wrote another book called Far from the Tree.
I read that too.
And an amazing book. But what stuck with me through all the years, and this is a decade ago that we first talked about this, was he was talking about parents whose children are autistic. And he talked about how hard it is for them, because there are some group of people saying, you can change this, you can fix this. Some of that might be snake oil, some of it might be real, some of it, but you can do something. And then there's you can't do anything about this, right? And you accept it. And if you accept your child for the way they are, maybe that's just an all around easier case. And what I love that he said is if you know you can't change something, it's easy to go about the business of accepting it. If you know you can change something, it's easy to go about the business of changing it. And most of us live in this very difficult middle part. But I think the way you just said it is a really elegant, almost poetic way of saying it's the negotiation between acceptance and action, and that negotiation in certain situations never gets settled.
Yeah.
It's not like you all reach an agreement and it's done. Yeah. You live in the negotiation.
I think so, and live in the question, but also I think nature is useful to kind of pay attention to. I mean, I lived in California where it was less visible, but I'm back on the East Coast. And just watching the seasons happen and watching, the flowers bloom and then fade away in the fall and the leaves fall off the trees and then the barren and the snow and a farmer knows that there's a time to sow and a time to reap. I think in America, especially, or in the West, we have this idea that we should always be growing, doing. And I think it's almost like disobeying the laws of nature in some fundamental way, because there is a time for rest. I mean, true rest, really gathering another round of information, not more energy. And I try to remember that this might not be a season of change. This might be a season of acceptance. I didn't grow up Christian, but a lot of my friends who grew up like in more evangelical circles, they always say, I'm in a real season of doubt, or this is a real season of abundance, and I always liked that language. I always thought it was like useful language because it implies that it's not forever. And again, that's a mercy.
Absolutely. We've referenced suffering a little bit, and you talk about discomfort is the doorway as the name of one of your Substack posts. And in it, you did something where you put a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. And I was struck by that because I've taught this program for years called Wise Habits. And I use a lot of Calvin and Hobbes strips to teach because I just think there's so much wisdom in them. Are you also a fan?
A casual fan, excuse me.
Okay.
I had stumbled across that. I think it was happiness isn't enough for me. I demand euphoria. I think that was the one.
Yep. Yep.
I stumbled across it and I just pulled it and I had it in a file of things that kind of delighted me. It's also something, my friend Hal says about addicts. He says addicts, the only emotional acceptable to an addict is euphoria. And he says, it's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Where's my euphoria?
Yes. I mean, I'm a lot of years sober, and like I still laugh because I relate with that. It's like, and I love that Calvin cartoon because where it starts is him enjoying a nice day. He's like, here I am enjoying this nice day, and then he thinks, but I'm not euphoric. Right. And then the last frame says, I can't remember whether he says I need to stop my mind while I'm still ahead, or my mind's out to get me, or something along those lines. Right. Of like, he's able to see, as knowing what I know about you and your taste from reading your Substack and looking at a lot of the things you reference. Calvin and Hobbes, I think, is a deeply, deeply wise strip across the board. And I think it's one of the more brilliant works of art.
Is that Bill
in humanity?
Bill Watterson?
Watterson.
Yeah. I think he's a Kenyan grad. I think he went to my college where I went. And there was a lore, kind of Kenyan lore, that his senior year, he drew cartoons all over the wall. Like he kind of did like his own Sistine Chapel of cartoons on the wall. And they painted over it. And it's this kind of like lost masterpiece, like somewhere in a dorm at Kenyon are all these early cartoons. But I think he was a philosophy major, and that's why he called it Calvin and Hobbes. And I don't know. It just really struck me. I just thought it was a funny thing, that it's that human thing, if a little is good, more is better. Yeah. Can I ask when did you get sober?
Well, I got sober from heroin in 1994.
Okay.
I stayed sober about 8 years. Then I started to drink again, and I drank for about 3 years. And then I've been sober from that for like 17 years. So the vast majority of my adult life has been in sobriety, which I'm very grateful for. I mean, in many ways, I'm grateful that like when I start, I just kind of burn the house down pretty quick. And it's pretty clear, like, okay, something needs to happen. Right. Versus like, the long goodbye kind of thing.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Speaking of Ohio and Bill Watterson, there's a big cartoon library at OSU, and they have one of the biggest collections of Bill Watterson cartoons in the world, and so you can go visit. And a little bit of a shrine for me. We talked a little bit about this idea of negotiating acceptance and action, and I think that where some of the things I pulled for that came from a post of yours about not minding what happens, which is a Krishnamurti quote. And I wanted to talk about something in particular that you talk about in there, which is you on a Vipassana retreat. Was that just this last December or was it the December before that?
It was last December, like 6 months ago, 5 months ago.
Okay. Yeah. You open to sort of sharing your experience?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was a real challenge for me. Like it was much more challenging than have you ever done a Vipassana?
I have done long, silent retreats, not a specific Vipassana, unless you consider Insight Meditation Society, like Jack Cornfield Tara Brach.
How long are those?
If you consider
8
that
days
Vipassana,
or 9 days or?
7 to 8. There's some weekend ones. I've mostly done Zen shishins, which are 8 days.
Okay. Yeah. And that's total silence.
Total silence. And like you said, no books, I'm like 2 days into it and I'm like, I'll give you $100 for a cereal box to read.
I know.
Like give me a cereal box to read. I know.
They had these instructions in the room about how you were supposed to clean your room when you left. And I read those like it was the Talmud or something. Like I went so deep on this thing in a fascinating way. It shows you what you're addicted to in a broader sense, not just about chemicals or anything, but really about I'm addicted to words. I'm addicted to information. I'm addicted to the news. I'm addicted to, and I'm also addicted to talking, like truly just talking. I found myself, I mean, it was a very fascinating experience and an experiment. It was what it felt like on my psyche. Yeah. And largely I was in an enormous amount of discomfort for the majority of the time, I would say. But I felt incredibly unmoored and kind of confused about even not being able to say certain like pleasantries, like in the line at the the dining hall. Like if you felt like you cut someone off and you just want to say, oh, sorry, were you here? Do you want to go? Like you couldn't do any of the like little signifiers of we're in a society and we're sharing space. I just found it really challenging. And I found it challenging I ended up having to talk to the teacher a few times because one night I was borderline almost having a panic attack. And then, and I found I enjoyed these talks, and they were only about 4 or 5 minutes long, but I enjoyed being witnessed. I enjoyed like seeing someone, like the basics of like relational communication are very important to me. And when I was supposed to exist in silence without them, I felt like a deep grief. I don't know. It was so much harder than I thought it would be. And, my meditation practice has been really wonky since I got back.
Interesting.
My wife and I were at the Botanic Gardens this morning and we meditated, and it was so nice. And I was like, I really want to get back into a practice, but I think I had like it wasn't quite trauma, but it was definitely like something got provoked. And I had moments of fear. I had moments of grief. I know they say, lots of stuff's going to come up, but, but something about it I found very challenging. That said, by the end of it, once you're allowed to talk for the last day, like I felt like I had been paroled. Like I was so excited. I went on these long walks up and down this road every single day, like 3 times a day. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And I saw my monkey mind really, really in action.
Yeah.
And I saw how, I'm in a society. What's that? There's another Krishnamurti quote that like, it's no measure of health to be well adapted to a profoundly sick society. I don't know if you've come across that one. Yeah. And I am somewhat adapted to this society. I mean, it's the one I grew up in. It's like I do fairly well navigating it. And then you take me out of that society and I don't have my, I don't know, whatever op-eds to read or my books to read or my music to listen to. And I realize, I'm a little bit insane actually. Like my mind I'm so far from being quiet. Although I will say I had a couple of meditations where I had no body, no time, that I did, I did taste that timeless realm, but the getting there, it was rough.
Yeah. Yeah, they can be rough. I actually do okay with the silence. I'm in groups of people, I'm a little shy, so I actually find it sort of enjoyable to be in companionship and not have to figure out what to say.
Yeah, my wife is the same way. She's done 2 or 3 Vipassanas, and she always appreciates not having to talk.
Yeah, I like that part. And even what I've learned is when the silence ends, I've learned to take myself away because it's overwhelming to me all of a sudden. But I do like being with the people. Like it's not that I want to be alone. I enjoy the community aspect. Yeah, I think for me, and you said in this post, I think you said that like boredom and discomfort are the 2 emotions you most can't tolerate. And I think that's very much, that's me too. And that it's the no reading that just kills me. That's probably the hardest for me because I can entertain myself pretty well with a book. Yeah. I've gone on a couple with the spiritual teacher, Adyashanti. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but they do something interesting, which is they give you like, it might be 2 or 3 paragraphs of his, and that's all you're allowed to read. And so you do what you did with the cleaning instructions on the wall. Right? You're like, I'm reading it, but for me, I descend deep into it. Like, since it's so little to read and I want to read so often, it becomes ultimately, certainly a contemplative act, if not a meditative act.
I also, hilariously, like I would make my bed as if it was going to be inspected by the military. Like I would just, you're trying to give yourself any activity. There were certain days where I just unfolded and refolded all my clothes. I didn't even have that many clothes there, but I just was looking. And it also showed me how addicted I am to action and doingness. I was constantly looking for something to actually do. That's why these walks outside just became like my lifeline.
That's interesting. I was just thinking how funny it would be if we segued into a commercial for Vipassana retreats, how mad they would be about like Josh Radnor says that,
Well, also, they're free, and I loved the Guenca talks at night. They have these pre-recorded talks from Guenca, I think they were in the earlier mid-90s, these talks, and they're fantastic, and they're really inspiring. And one of the things he says is, we give you a taste of what it's like to be a monk for 10 days. We take away the world from you. We give you all your meals, and all you're here to do is be contemplative and sink into this place. My wife tries to remind me, she says, when you came home from that, you were euphoric. But I got like 2 days later, I went into this like weird kind of down depressive state that didn't lift for a while. So I've been struggling in some ways. I wrote that Substack piece to try to work through what that experience was for me, what it meant. and maybe I'm still working through it as I talk. Even I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I need to do some more processing of that. But it was it was incredibly rewarding, but it was also very hard. And when people say, "Would you go back?" My answer right now is no. I think I did it, and I hear wonderful things about like insight and all that. But
yeah, I don't know if Adyashanti is still doing retreats. It turns out that those have been my favorite because they don't feel like an endurance contest. Right. You do have to be quiet. You can only read this thing, but it doesn't feel like meditation battle in like you're meditating for like 10 hours a day. He gives a couple talks. He actually does a guided meditation. There's just a little bit more happening. You still meditate a lot, don't get me wrong, but it just felt less arduous in the bad way. Not that some difficulty isn't good, but too much difficulty, as you're reflecting, can be too much. Well, we are at the end of our time for this. You and I are going to continue in a post-show conversation, and we're going to talk about a Substack post that you wrote called Locked Doors, but I'm going to put a slightly different point on it. This conversation is for any of you who wrestle with wanting what you can't have, which feels like a story of my life up to a certain point. Listeners, if you'd like access to that post-show conversation, ad-free episodes, a special episode I do, and to be a supporter of the show, you can go to oneyoufeed.net/join. And last thing I'll say, Josh, if you want a way back into meditation that feels nice, a friend of mine and one of the best meditation teachers I know, Henry Schuckman, has an app called The Way, and it's really good. Okay. It's just very nice, he's got a great English accent. It's just very soothing and wonderful. Okay. So anyway, thank you, Josh, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
If what you just heard was helpful to you, please consider making a monthly donation to support the One You Feed podcast. When you join our membership community with this monthly pledge, you get lots of exclusive members-only benefits. It's our way of saying thank you for your support. Now, we are so grateful for the members of our community. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without their support, and we don't take a single dollar for granted. To learn more, make a donation at any level, and become a member of the One You Feed community, go to oneyoufeed.net/join. The One You Feed podcast would like to sincerely thank our sponsors for supporting the show.